The sound wasn't the mystery. The room at the end of it was. Marlene hadn't spoken her brother's name in decades. Then, one quiet afternoon, she inherited his forgotten house deep in the Oregon woods. It felt untouched, paused in time. But the first night inside, her German shepherd stopped at the hallway, listening to something buried beyond the walls, something that didn't belong to silence. Have you ever felt like a place was trying to tell you something, even when nothing was there? Marlene Hayes woke before the alarm, the way she always did. The room was still gray with early light. Tacoma mornings had a softness to them, even in the colder months, a kind of quiet that settled into the walls. She lay there for a moment, listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a car passing somewhere below, the slow, steady breathing of Coda at the foot of the bed. Routine had a sound. She'd come to recognize it. She swung her legs over the side, careful not to disturb the dog. But Coda's ears twitched anyway. He opened one eye, then the other, watching her with that calm, attentive look he always had, like he was already awake, just waiting for her to catch up. "All right," she murmured, reaching for her robe. "I'm up." The apartment was small but neat. Everything had its place. A narrow kitchen with a window that faced a row of identical buildings. A table by the wall, always set for one. A chair that creaked the same way every morning when she sat down. She poured coffee into the same chipped mug she'd used for years. The handle had a hairline crack, but it held. Most things did, if you treated them carefully. Coda followed her in, nails clicking softly on the floor. He sat beside the table without being told, watching her with quiet expectation. "You already ate," she said, though she reached for the treat jar anyway. His tail thumped once against the cabinet. Outside, the day unfolded slowly. A delivery truck idled across the street. Someone argued faintly on a balcony. The kind of ordinary noise that made everything feel stable, predictable, safe. Marlene liked that. She didn't rush anymore. There was no reason to. Her days moved in measured steps. Coffee, a short walk with Coda, a few errands if needed, then back home before the light faded. She didn't think much beyond that. It wasn't necessary. The phone rang just after noon. She almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown number. She watched it for a second, hand hovering over the counter. Coda lifted his head from where he lay near the door, eyes shifting toward the sound. Something about the way he looked at it made her hesitate. Then she picked up. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. Paper shuffling, a throat clearing. "Ms. Marlene Hayes?" "Yes." "My name is Carl Benton. I'm calling from the county clerk's office in Lane County, Oregon." Oregon. The word didn't land right. It felt misplaced, like it belonged in someone else's conversation. I'm sorry," she said. "I think you might have the wrong number." "No, ma'am. I don't believe so." Another pause. "This concerns an estate. A property, specifically. You've been listed as the next of kin." Marlene leaned against the counter without realizing she'd moved. "I don't have any property in Oregon." "Yes, ma'am. That's correct." "This would be an inheritance." Something tightened in her chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just resistance. From who? There was a shift in the man's tone. Careful now. Daniel Hayes. The name sat there between them. For a moment, Marlene didn't understand what she'd heard. It passed through her like sound without meaning. Then it settled. Slowly. Daniel. Her hand tightened slightly around the phone. "That's not possible," she said, though she didn't know why she said it. "I'm very sorry to inform you," the man continued, voice softer now. "Mr. Hayes passed away 2 weeks ago. Natural causes. He lived alone. Your name was the only one listed in his records." Marlene didn't answer right away. The kitchen felt different suddenly, smaller, the light harsher than it had been a minute ago. "I haven't spoken to him in over 30 years, she said finally. "I understand," the clerk replied. "Unfortunately, that doesn't change the legal designation. The property has been unoccupied for some time. We've secured it temporarily, but arrangements will need to be made." Marlene stared at the window. Across the street, someone was watering plants on a balcony. The hose sprayed unevenly, catching sunlight in thin arcs. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before the phone rang. "You're saying he left me a house?" "Yes, ma'am." "In Oregon?" "Yes." She let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. "I didn't even know he was still alive." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm sorry," the man said again. They spoke for a few more minutes. Details she didn't fully absorb. Addresses, paperwork, a number to call back. She wrote it down on a scrap of paper that already had grocery items listed on it. Milk, bread, dog food. When the call ended, she didn't move. Coda stood up. He walked over slowly, head tilted slightly, watching her face. Then he pressed his nose gently against her hand. Warm, solid. "I'm fine," she said, though she hadn't been asked. She set the phone down. Daniel. The name stirred something she hadn't touched in years. Not a clear memory, just the outline of one. Raised voices in a hallway. A door closing too hard. The feeling of something final happening without anyone saying the word. She pushed it away. There was no point in going there. The afternoon passed, but it didn't settle back into place. Things felt slightly off, like furniture moved just enough to notice but not enough to fix. She tried to read. The words blurred. She made tea she didn't drink. By evening, the light faded earlier than she expected. Coda stayed close, closer than usual. He followed her from room to room, not in his normal relaxed way, but with a quiet alertness. His ears flicked toward sounds she couldn't hear. Once he stopped near the front door and stood there, still as a statue, staring at it. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just listened. The hallway outside the apartment was empty. She knew that. She could feel it. But Coda didn't move for a long time. His body was tense, not afraid, focused, like he was waiting for something. Marlene watched him from the kitchen. A strange feeling crept in. Not fear. Not yet. Just a quiet unease that didn't belong to anything she could name. "Come on," she said after a while. "There's nothing there." He turned his head slightly, as if considering her voice. Then, slowly, he stepped away from the door and came back to her. But he didn't lie down. Not right away. That night, when she turned off the lights, the apartment didn't feel quite as familiar as it had that morning. And just before she closed her eyes, she had the distinct, unsettling thought that something had already started moving, and she hadn't noticed when. Marlene didn't sleep much that night. She turned once, then again. The sheets twisted around her legs. The room felt too quiet, like the silence had weight to it. Every small sound stood out. The faint click of the heating unit, the soft shift of Coda adjusting on the floor, the distant hum of something electrical in the walls. At one point, she opened her eyes and stared into the dark. Coda was sitting up, not lying down, not resting. Sitting, facing the door, his outline barely visible, but unmistakable. Ears forward, body still. Watching. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't move. She waited, counted her breathing without meaning to. Nothing followed. No footsteps in the hall. No voices. No reason for him to be like that. After a while, he lowered himself again. Slow. Controlled. Like he'd decided, not relaxed. Marlene turned onto her side and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easy after that. Morning didn't fix anything. It just made things clearer. The coffee tasted the same. The light came through the window the same way. But something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough that the edges of things felt sharper. She picked up the paper where she'd written the number the clerk had given her. Lane County, Oregon. She turned it over once in her hand before dialing. The call was shorter this time, more direct. The man on the other end recognized her name immediately. "Yes, Ms. Hayes. Thank you for calling back." She asked for the address. He read it out slowly. A long road name she didn't recognize. Directions that sounded less like instructions and more like warnings. Gravel access. Limited maintenance. Nearest town over an hour away. "Has anyone been there recently?" she asked. "Not to our knowledge," he said. "The property's been inactive for years. Utilities are disconnected. It's isolated." He paused, then added carefully, "We've secured the exterior as best we can, but it hasn't been occupied." Marlene wrote everything down. Her handwriting felt tighter than usual. "Did he live there?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. That was his residence." She pictured it, though she didn't know why. Daniel, in a place like that, alone. "Thank you," she said, and ended the call before there was anything else to ask. The apartment felt smaller after that. Coda followed her as she moved from the kitchen to the living room. He stayed close, but not in the way he usually did. There was a watchfulness in him now. Subtle, but there. She noticed it when she said the word out loud. "Oregon." His head lifted. Not sharply. Not alarmed. Just aware. She tried it again, softer this time. "The house." Coda's ears came forward, a slight stiffening through his shoulders. His eyes shifted to her, then toward the door, then back again. Marlene frowned. "That's strange," she muttered. He didn't respond further, just settled, though not fully, like he was holding something in place. The rest of the day didn't pass easily. She tried to go through her usual routine, a short walk, a stop at the store. But everything felt slightly out of sync. She caught herself forgetting things, leaving the milk on the counter, standing too long in one aisle without remembering why she'd gone there. And under it all, something kept pulling at her. Not curiosity, something heavier. Memory. It came in pieces. Not clear images. Just fragments. Daniel's voice lower than she remembered. A laugh that used to come easily, before it didn't. The way he used to stand with his hands in his pockets when he didn't want to argue anymore. The last time they spoke. She hadn't thought about that in years. It wasn't a dramatic ending, no shouting, no door slamming, just a conversation that went too far, then stopped too suddenly. Words that couldn't be taken back. Silence that followed. And then, nothing. No calls, no letters, no attempts to fix it. She'd told herself it didn't matter. That time had taken care of it. But now there was a house, a place he'd lived in, a place she'd never seen. She sat at the table that evening, the paper with the address in front of her again. Coda lay nearby, but his head rested on his paws only loosely. His eyes stayed half open, watching her. "I don't have to go," she said out loud. The words sounded thin in the room. "No one expects me to." That was true. She could sign the paperwork, let the county handle it, sell it without ever seeing it. Close it off the same way everything else had been closed off. Simple. Clean. She looked at Coda. He didn't move, didn't tilt his head, didn't react the way he usually did when she spoke to him. Just watched. "You don't care," she said, almost with a small smile. His tail gave one slow tap against the floor, but he didn't relax. That night came quicker than she expected. The light faded. The sounds outside quieted. The apartment settled again into that familiar evening stillness. But it wasn't the same. Coda went to the door again. Not immediately. Not all at once. He stood up halfway through the evening and walked there like it was something he needed to check. He sat this time facing it. Waiting. Marlene stayed where she was, watching him. The hallway beyond the door remained silent, still, unremarkable. And yet, "You hear something?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Marlene felt that same unease from the night before, only clearer now. Defined. Not fear. Not yet. But something that didn't belong to her routine. Something that didn't fit into the life she'd carefully kept small and manageable. She looked back at the paper on the table. The address. The house. Daniel. The weight of it sat there, steady and undeniable. She exhaled slowly. "I'll go," she said, more to herself than anything else. Coda's ears twitched. That was all. But it was enough. Marlene leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The decision didn't feel right. It didn't feel wrong either. It just felt necessary. Like something had already started, and she was only now catching up to it. Across the room, Coda remained at the door. Still, listening. Coda didn't move until Marlene stood up. It wasn't sudden. He simply shifted, as if whatever he'd been waiting for had passed, or changed, and followed her back toward the kitchen. But he stayed close. Closer than usual. Close enough that she felt him at her side even when she wasn't looking. The decision settled in overnight. Not cleanly, not with certainty. But it stayed. By morning, it felt less like a choice and more like something already in motion. Marlene moved through her routine again, but this time with purpose threaded through it. She made a list. Wrote it slowly, carefully. Gas, food, blankets, flashlight, extra batteries. She checked drawers she hadn't opened in months, pulled out an old canvas bag from the closet. It still smelled faintly of cedar and something older she couldn't place. Coda watched everything, not restless, not anxious, just attentive. When she picked up the car keys, he stood before she called him. "You're coming," she said. His tail moved once. The drive began just after noon. Tacoma faded behind them in layers. First the familiar streets, then the busier roads, then the long stretches of highway that carried them farther than she'd gone in years. Traffic thinned gradually. Buildings gave way to open land, then to scattered houses, then to trees. More trees than she expected. The sky seemed wider out there, the light sharper. Marlene drove steadily, both hands on the wheel. She kept the radio off. It felt unnecessary. The sound of the engine was enough. The rhythm of the road. The occasional shift in Coda's weight in the back seat. He didn't lie down. He sat most of the time, looking out the window, then forward again. Alert, but not tense. Like he recognized something about the direction, even if she didn't. They crossed into Oregon in the late afternoon. There was no real marker for it. Just a sign at the side of the road. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Marlene noticed it only because Coda shifted again, his ears lifting slightly. "You feel that?" she murmured, half to herself. The road changed after that. Not immediately, but gradually. The pavement grew rougher. Cracks ran across it like veins. Then came stretches of patchwork repairs. Then longer gaps between other cars, until there were none at all. She followed the directions the clerk had given her, checking the paper more often than she needed to. The GPS had started cutting out. First briefly, then more often, then entirely. The signal disappeared just before the road narrowed. Gravel replaced asphalt with a sudden hollow crunch under the tires. The sound echoed up through the car, different from anything before it. Looser, less certain. Marlene slowed. The trees pressed closer here. Tall, dense. The kind that blocked out more light than they let through. Shadows gathered between them, even though the sun was still up. The air felt cooler, though the windows were closed. She drove carefully, hands tightening slightly on the wheel. No houses, no signs, just the road and the forest. At one point she considered turning back. The thought came quickly, quietly. No one would know. She could say she tried. That it was too far, too remote. That it wasn't worth it. But the thought passed just as quickly, because something in her knew. If she turned around now, it wouldn't feel finished. The road curved once, then again, and then the house appeared. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was just there. Set back slightly from the road, partially obscured by trees. A simple structure, larger than she expected, but not imposing. The kind of house that didn't draw attention to itself. Marlene slowed the car to a stop. For a moment, she didn't get out. She just sat there looking. The house didn't look abandoned. That was the first thing she noticed. It didn't look lived in either. It looked paused. Like someone had stepped away and forgotten to come back. The paint had faded, but not peeled away entirely. The windows were intact. The porch sagged slightly at one corner, but held. The roof, older, but not collapsed. No obvious damage, no signs of decay overtaking it. just stillness. Coda stood in the back seat, not excited, not eager, focused. His nose pressed lightly against the glass, drawing in slow, deliberate breaths. His ears angled forward, then shifted slightly, as if tracking something too faint for her to notice. "All right," Marlene said quietly, though her voice didn't carry far. She opened the door. The air outside was colder than she expected. Not sharp, just different. Cleaner, maybe, but heavier, too. It carried the smell of damp earth, old wood, and something metallic beneath it. Faint, hard to place. Coda jumped down beside her. He didn't run, didn't explore the way he usually did in new places. He stayed close. They walked toward the house together. Each step sounded louder than it should have on the gravel. The quiet out there absorbed everything else. No distant traffic, no voices, not even birds. Just the soft crunch of their movement. Marlene reached the porch and paused. The door stood closed, solid, unlocked, just as the clerk had said. Her hand rested on the handle for a moment longer than necessary. Then she pushed it open. The air inside was still. Not stale exactly, just undisturbed. Dust lay evenly across surfaces, not thick, not chaotic. Settled, like it had taken its time. The smell was stronger inside. Wood, paper, a faint trace of metal, something old, but not unpleasant. Marlene stepped in slowly. The floorboards held under her weight. A slight creak here and there, but nothing unstable. The light filtered through the windows in narrow strips, catching particles in the air that moved only when she did. Furniture remained. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bookshelf against one wall. Everything placed with intention, then left exactly as it was. Coda moved ahead of her, slowly, deliberately. His nose stayed low, but he didn't dart from place to place. He traced paths, paused at corners, lifted his head occasionally, listening, tracking something. "What do you smell?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, but he moved deeper into the house. Marlene followed. The rooms connected simply. No unnecessary space. Everything built for use, not appearance. A kitchen that led into a small living area. A doorway that opened into a hallway beyond. She stopped at the entrance to it. The hallway stretched farther than she expected, longer than it should have been, given what she'd seen from outside. The light didn't reach all the way down. It narrowed as it went. The air felt cooler there. Coda stood at the edge of it, not stepping in, just watching. Marlene felt that same quiet unease from before. Stronger now. Not fear, but something close. She drew in a slow breath. "It's just a house," she said. The word sounded small in the space. Coda didn't move, but he didn't back away either. Marlene stepped past him. One step into the hallway, then another. The floor beneath her feet felt the same as the rest of the house. But something about the space didn't align. She couldn't explain it. Not yet. Behind her, the front door remained open, letting in a narrow line of daylight that didn't quite reach where she stood. And ahead, the hallway waited, still, silent, unchanged. Marlene stood in the hallway longer than she meant to. It wasn't fear holding her there. It was uncertainty. The kind that doesn't push you back, but doesn't let you move forward easily either. Behind her, the front door remained open. A thin strip of light stretched across the floor, stopping just short of where she stood. The rest of the hallway absorbed it, swallowing the brightness into something dull and gray. Coda stepped past her, slow, careful. His paws made almost no sound against the floorboards. He moved a few feet ahead, then stopped. His ears lifted, angled slightly, not forward this time but to the side, listening. Marlene followed him deeper. Each step felt deliberate. Not cautious exactly, just measured. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. That thought returned, clearer now. From outside, the house hadn't looked large enough to hold this much space. But here she was, walking it, feeling the distance between one wall and the next, between the entrance and wherever it ended. Her hand brushed lightly against the paneling as she walked. Wood. Dry. Cold. The grain uneven in places, smoother in others. It felt older than the rest of the house somehow. Or maybe just different. Coda stopped again. This time he didn't move right away. His body went still. Not stiff, not tense, just fixed. Marlene noticed the shift immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't look back. His head tilted slightly. And then it came. Faint. Soft enough that she almost missed it. A small sound, tap, then silence. Marlene held her breath without realizing it. Another moment passed. Nothing. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. "Old pipes," she murmured, or wood settling, or something shifting in the walls. It had to be. But before the thought settled, tap. There it was again. Not steady, not rhythmic. Just there. Irregular. Out of place. Coda's ears snapped forward this time. He took one step toward the sound, then another. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He moved with purpose. Marlene felt something tighten in her chest. "Hey," she said, softer now. "It's nothing." But the words didn't carry weight. Not here. Coda continued forward. The hallway narrowed slightly as it went. The light faded further, leaving only what filtered in from the open door behind them and a dim, muted glow from a small window somewhere farther ahead. The air felt cooler. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Tap. Closer now. Marlene stopped walking. Coda didn't. He reached a section of wall about halfway down the corridor and paused. This time he leaned in. His nose hovered just above the wood. He inhaled slowly, deeply, as if drawing in more than scent, like he was trying to understand something beneath it. Marlene stepped up beside him. "This?" she asked. Coda didn't move. His focus stayed fixed on that exact spot. Marlene looked at the wall. At first glance, it was the same as the rest. Vertical wooden panels, aged but intact. Nothing broken, nothing loose. But the longer she looked, the more something felt off. Not obvious, subtle. The way the seams lined up, the way the wood caught the light, just enough to make her pause. Tap. Right there. Not loud, but clear. Marlene's breath caught. She leaned closer. The sound wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from behind the wall, a faint, hollow note beneath the wood. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface. Cold, colder than the rest. Coda shifted his weight. Then, gently, he scratched. Not a frantic motion, not digging, just one slow drag of his paw against the panel. Then he stopped, looked back at her, waiting. Marlene swallowed. Her mind worked through possibilities. Old construction, hidden pipes, air vents. Something loose behind the wall. All of it reasonable. All of it explainable. But none of it sat right. "Okay," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. She pressed her palm flat against the wood, listened. Nothing, just the faint echo of her own movement. She pulled her hand back, took a small step away. "It's probably just..." Tap. Sharper this time. Closer. Coda's head lifted immediately. His ears stood tall, locked onto the sound. Marlene felt the unease return. Stronger now, more defined. Not fear, but no longer something she could dismiss. She looked down the rest of the hallway. It ended in shadow. No doors. No turns. Just a blank stretch that didn't offer answers. Then she looked back at the wall, at the exact place Coda had stopped. The air felt different there. Still, heavy, like it held something just out of reach. "All right," she said, almost under her breath. Coda stepped back half a pace, giving her space, not retreating, just making room. Marlene reached out again. This time her fingers moved more slowly across the paneling, feeling, tracing, looking for anything that didn't belong. A ridge, a gap, a difference in texture. The wood shifted slightly under her touch. Barely, but enough. She froze. Her eyes narrowed. That shouldn't happen. Not like that. She pressed again. The panel gave a fraction. Not loose, but not fixed either. Coda leaned in once more, his nose almost touching the seam. Tap. This time the sound came from deeper behind it. Muted, but unmistakable. Marlene stepped back. Her heart beat a little faster now. Not from panic, from recognition. Something here wasn't right. Not broken, not damaged. Hidden. She looked down at Coda. He met her gaze. Calm, steady, certain. "Yeah," she said softly. "I hear it too." The hallway stretched around them, unchanged on the surface, but something beneath it, something quiet, persistent, was beginning to make itself known. And for the first time since stepping inside the house, Marlene understood. This wasn't just an old place left behind. Something in it was still trying to be found. Marlene didn't move right away. The thought stayed with her, quiet but steady, as she stood in the hallway beside Coda. The house hadn't changed. The walls were the same. The air still. But her sense of it had shifted. This wasn't just a place someone had left behind. There was intention here. She drew in a slow breath and stepped closer to the wall again. "All right," she said softly. Coda stayed where he was, watching her hands. Marlene ran her fingers along the paneling, this time more carefully. The wood felt uneven in a way she hadn't noticed before. Not damaged, but placed. The seams between boards weren't perfectly aligned. Some nails sat slightly deeper than others. A few had a faint sheen, less dulled than the rest. Newer. That didn't make sense. She leaned in, bringing her face closer to the surface. The light from behind barely reached this far, but it was enough. Enough to see that one section, no wider than her shoulders, sat just a fraction different from the rest. Coda stepped forward again. He pressed his nose to that same spot and inhaled slowly. Then he pulled back, his ears tilting as if listening again for that faint, irregular sound. Tap. Marlene didn't flinch this time. She expected it. Behind there, she murmured. Not a question. A statement. The idea settled into place with surprising clarity. She straightened slightly and looked down the length of the hallway again. It still stretched farther than it should have. That feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. The outside of the house didn't match this. She was sure of it now. "I'm going to check something," she said. Coda watched her turn. They walked back toward the front of the house together. The light grew stronger with each step. The air warmer, more familiar. By the time she reached the living area, the tension eased just slightly, but not enough to disappear. Marlene stepped outside. The forest greeted her the same way as before. Still. Quiet. The faint rustle of leaves somewhere deeper in the trees. She turned and looked at the house again, this time more carefully. Her eyes traced the structure from one end to the other. The width, the shape, the spacing of the windows, the length of the walls. Then she pictured the hallway, counted the steps in her mind, measured the distance she'd walked. It didn't line up, not even close. Marlene frowned. "That's not right," she said under her breath. Coda stood beside her, looking up briefly before turning his attention back toward the house. She walked along the outside wall, following the line that matched the hallway inside. The ground was uneven here, covered in fallen leaves and small branches. The wood siding looked solid, weathered but intact. No signs of additions, no visible seams, no indication that anything had been built onto it. And yet, she stopped halfway down, stared at the section that should have matched the place Coda had stopped inside. From the outside, it looked no different from the rest. But she felt it again, that same subtle misalignment, not in the structure, in the space. She couldn't explain it, only feel it. Coda let out a low breath, almost like a quiet huff. Not a warning, just awareness. Marlene nodded slightly, though she wasn't sure why. "Yeah," she said. "I see it." They went back inside. The air felt cooler now after being outside, the stillness heavier. The hallway waited where they'd left it, unchanged, but not unnoticed anymore. Marlene walked straight toward the spot this time. No hesitation. Coda moved ahead of her, stopping at the same place, his body aligned with it as if drawn there. Marlene placed both hands on the panel, pressed gently. Nothing. She pushed harder. The wood gave just slightly under the pressure. Not enough to open, but enough to confirm what she already knew. It wasn't fixed the same way as the rest. She stepped back and looked around. There wasn't much to work with. no tools in sight. Just the quiet house and whatever it held. Marlene walked back to the kitchen and opened a drawer. Utensils. Old. Clean. Carefully placed. She picked up a butter knife, turned it in her hand. It would have to do. When she returned to the hallway, Coda hadn't moved, still watching, still listening. "Let's see," she said quietly. She slid the edge of the knife into the narrow seam between two panels. At first, it didn't go in. Then, with a small shift of pressure, it slipped. The wood creaked softly, not loud, but enough to echo slightly in the confined space. Marlene paused, listened. Nothing else responded. She pressed again. The panel shifted a fraction more. Coda stepped back half a step, giving her room, not retreating, just adjusting. Marlene worked the knife slowly along the seam. Careful, patient. Each movement loosened something small, a nail, a joint, a piece that had been set deliberately, not meant to be disturbed. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, from focus. Tap. The sound came again, closer now, muted, almost contained. Marlene froze. The knife still lodged in the seam. Her eyes flicked toward Coda. He was already looking at her, ears forward, still calm but ready. She exhaled slowly, then pushed again. This time the panel shifted more noticeably. A faint gap appeared along the edge. Darkness behind it. Not shadow, space. Marlene's heart beat faster now, not wildly, but steady, aware. She widened the gap slightly. The air that slipped through was colder, carried that same faint metallic scent she'd noticed before. Old. Sealed. She pulled the knife free and gripped the edge of the panel with her fingers. Hesitated. Just for a second. Then she pulled. The wood gave with a low, reluctant sound. Not breaking. Releasing. The panel moved outward just enough to reveal what lay behind it. A narrow opening. Not large. Just enough for a person to pass through. Marlene stepped back instinctively. Coda stepped forward. He lowered his head, sniffed the air that drifted out, then looked into the darkness beyond. Not afraid. Not hesitant. Certain. Marlene stared at the opening. At the space that shouldn't have been there. The hallway had been too long. Now she knew why. Because it didn't end where it appeared to. It continued. Hidden. Waiting. She swallowed. "Well," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying in the still air. "There it is." Coda stepped through first. Slowly. Carefully. Marlene watched him disappear into the narrow passage. Then she followed. The air changed the moment she stepped through. Not dramatically, but enough. It was colder inside the hidden space d'automne, not the natural coolness of the hallway. This was deeper. Still. Sealed. The kind of air that hadn't moved in a long time. She paused just inside the opening. The panel behind her rested slightly ajar, letting in a thin slice of light from the hallway. It stretched across the floor and stopped at her feet, swallowed quickly by the darkness ahead. "Coda," she said softly. He was already a few steps in, not far, just enough that his shape blended into the dimness. His ears were still up, his body angled forward, focused. Marlene reached back and grabbed the flashlight from her bag. She hadn't planned to use it so soon, but now it felt necessary. The beam flickered once before steadying. Light filled the narrow passage. The space was tighter than she expected. The walls were unfinished. Raw wood, rough and uneven. No paint, no decoration. Just structure. Built for purpose, not appearance. The ceiling dipped slightly lower than the hallway behind it. She had to tilt her head just a bit as she stepped forward. Coda moved again. Slow, deliberate. His paws made a soft, hollow sound against the floor, different from the rest of the house. Lighter, thinner beneath. Marlene noticed it immediately. This wasn't part of the original structure. This had been added, built afterward. "Daniel," she murmured, almost without thinking. The name lingered in the space, absorbed. They moved deeper. The passage stretched farther than she expected. Not long, but longer than a simple hidden compartment. It curved slightly to the right, just enough to break the line of sight ahead. The air carried that same faint metallic scent. Stronger now, mixed with something else. Oil, maybe. Old paper. Something preserved. Coda stopped. Marlene nearly walked into him. He stood still again, listening. The flashlight beam passed over his back and continued ahead, and stopped. At a wall. Or what looked like one. Marlene stepped closer. The passage ended in a flat surface. Wood again. But different from the rest. This wasn't rough or unfinished. This was deliberate, smooth, sealed. No visible handle, no hinge. Just a solid panel, fitted tightly into the frame. Coda lowered his head and sniffed along the bottom edge. Then he paused. His nose hovered just above a narrow seam that ran along the side. Marlene followed the line with the flashlight. There it was. A vertical gap, barely visible, almost perfectly concealed. "This wasn't meant to be found," she said quietly. Coda looked back at hers, not waiting this time, just acknowledging. Then he stepped aside, giving her space again. Marlene adjusted her grip on the flashlight. Her hand felt steady, more than she expected. The unease was still there, but it had shifted, less uncertainty, more clarity. She reached out and pressed her fingers along the seam. Nothing. She pushed slightly harder. Still nothing. She exhaled, then tried again, this time lower, closer to where Coda had been focused. Her fingers found something. A slight indentation. Not obvious. Not meant to be. She pressed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft click. The sound was small, contained, but unmistakable. Marlene froze. Coda's ears lifted sharply. The panel shifted. Just a fraction. Enough to break the seal. Marlene pulled her hand back slightly, then reached forward again and gripped the edge. It moved this time. Slowly, reluctantly. The wood creaked, not loudly, but with a weight that suggested it hadn't been opened in years. The gap widened. Darkness spilled out. Not empty darkness. Depth. Marlene stepped back instinctively. The air that came through was colder. Carried that same metallic scent, stronger now. And something else. Stillness. A different kind. Not the quiet of an empty house. The quiet of something kept. Preserved. Coda stepped forward before she did. He moved through the opening without hesitation, not rushing, not cautious. Certain. Marlene followed more slowly. The flashlight beam swept into the space beyond and revealed a room. Small, windowless, but not unfinished. The walls here were complete, clean, structured, built with intention. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit, a thin cord trailing down beside it. The beam shifted, caught on something metal, a cabinet, low, sturdy, placed against one wall. Then, a table. Simple, organized, not abandoned. Everything inside this room had been placed carefully, nothing scattered, nothing left in disorder. Marlene stepped fully inside. The air felt different here. Not stale, not decayed, just contained. Like it had been waiting. She lowered the flashlight slightly. Coda moved to the center of the room and stopped. Then, slowly, he sat. The tension that had followed him since Tacoma seemed to ease. Not completely, but enough. Marlene noticed. "That's different," she said softly. He didn't respond, just remained there, calm, present. Marlene turned slowly, taking in the room. Her eyes moved from the cabinet, to the table, to the shelves along the far wall. And there, she saw them, stacked neatly, labeled, rows of cassette tapes, beside them, notebooks, bound, ordered, deliberate. Marlene stepped closer. Her breath slowed, not from fear, from something else, recognition, not of the objects, but of the care behind them. Someone had spent time here, a lot of time, not hiding, not storing, working, returning, again and again. Her fingers hovered over one of the tapes. She didn't touch it yet. Didn't need to. Not yet. Behind her, a faint sound. Tap. Marlene turned. The flashlight beam shifted to the corner of the room. A small metal vent, mounted near the ceiling. Loose. Moving slightly as air passed through it from somewhere beyond. Each shift produced that same irregular sound. Tap. Then silence. Tap. It was simple, mechanical. Nothing mysterious about it. And yet, it had led her here. Marlene let out a quiet breath. "So that's it," she said. But the words didn't feel complete. Because the sound was never the point. The room was. She turned back to the table, to the tapes, to the notebooks, to the space her brother had built and kept hidden. For years. Coda remained still behind her, no longer listening, no longer searching, as if whatever had been waiting to be found had finally been reached. Marlene stood in the center of the room and didn't move for a while. The flashlight rested loosely in her hand, its beam angled downward now, catching the edge of the table and the legs of the chair tucked neatly beneath it. Dust didn't swirl here the way it had in the main house. It sat lightly, undisturbed, as if even time had been careful in this space. She took a slow step forward, then another. The floor felt solid beneath her, not hollow like the passage. This room had been built to hold. Coda remained where he was, calm, still. That was what unsettled her the most. Not the hidden wall, not the passage, Not even the room itself. It was him, the way he had changed. Back in Tacoma, he had paced, listened, stayed alert in a way she couldn't explain. But here, he had stopped, as if something inside him had settled. Marlene glanced at him briefly, then turned back to the table. The cassette tapes were arranged in rows, each one labeled in small, careful handwriting. Not rushed, not messy. Each word placed with intention. Dates, short phrases, sometimes just a single name. Her fingers hovered over the nearest one. She read the label. March 12th. No year, just the date. She moved to the next. April 3rd, kitchen. Her breath caught slightly. Kitchen. The word felt familiar in a way she couldn't place right away. She picked up the tape. It was lighter than she expected, the plastic cool against her skin. Daniel, she said quietly. The name sounded different in this room, closer. She set the tape back down. Not yet. Her attention shifted to the notebooks, stacked neatly beside the tapes, bound with simple twine. She untied one slowly, her fingers careful, almost respectful without realizing it. The cover creaked slightly as she opened it. Inside, pages filled with handwriting, the same careful script as the labels, not rushed, not scattered, organized. Each page dated, each entry precise. Marlene scanned the first few lines. Observations, notes, descriptions of the house, weather patterns, repairs made, supplies tracked. It read like a record, a log of daily life. She flipped a few pages. The tone didn't change, still methodical, still contained. But then, a line caught her eye. Replayed tape from May, still clear. Marlene paused. Her fingers stilled on the page. Replayed. Tape. She turned the page. Another entry. Voices intact. No distortion. Her chest tightened slightly. Voices, plural. She looked back at the tapes, at the rows of labeled cassettes. Something shifted in her understanding. This wasn't just documentation. This was something else, something deliberate. She closed the notebook gently and set it back on the table. Her hand moved to the tapes again, slower this time, more certain. She picked one up. May 18th, living room. Her throat felt dry. She turned, scanning the room again. There, on the far side of the table. A small tape recorder, metal casing, worn but intact, placed carefully, not hidden, waiting. Marlene walked toward it. Each step measured. The flashlight beam followed her movement, catching on the edges of objects, throwing soft shadows against the walls. She reached the table and set the flashlight down beside the recorder. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she picked up the tape. Her hands were steady. She slid it into place. The click was soft, controlled. She hesitated, her thumb resting over the play button. Coda shifted slightly behind her, not moving closer, not pulling away. Just present. Marlene pressed play. For a second, nothing. Just a faint mechanical hum. Then, a voice. Soft. Distant. Familiar. Marlene froze. She didn't breathe. The sound filled the small room, thin at first. Then clearer, a man's voice, younger, lighter than she remembered. Daniel. There was no doubt. Her hand moved instinctively toward the table to steady herself. The voice continued, not speaking to her, not directly, just talking, simple words, everyday conversation, and then another voice, quieter, but unmistakable. Marlene's breath caught sharply. Her own, younger, clear, alive in a way she hadn't heard in decades. She stepped back, just a fraction, as if the sound itself had weight. "What?" she whispered. But the word didn't finish. The recording went on, fragments of a conversation, something about dinner, a small argument about nothing, the tone familiar, the rhythm of it. Real, not imagined, not recreated, recorded. Marlene felt something shift deep in her chest. Not pain. Not yet. Recognition. She pressed the stop button. The silence that followed was immediate, heavy. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closer. She stared at the recorder, then at the tape, then at the notebooks. Daniel had kept this, all of it, not hidden in chaos, not forgotten, preserved, organized, revisited, again and again. Marlene swallowed. Her eyes moved slowly across the rows of tapes, each one labeled, each one containing something. Moments, fragments, pieces of a life she had left behind, or thought she had. Behind her, Coda lay down, fully, his head resting on his paws, the tension that had carried him through the house, gone, as if his part in this was finished. Marlene turned slightly, looking at him. "You knew," she said softly, not as a question, just a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Marlene turned back to the table. Her hand hovered over the tapes again. This time she didn't hesitate. She understood now. This room wasn't built to hide something from the world. It was built to hold something that couldn't be let go, and whatever Daniel had left behind was still here, waiting, not to be discovered, but to be heard. Marlene stood very still. Her hand rested near the tape recorder, but she didn't reach for it again right away. The silence in the room felt different now, not empty, not quiet in the way the rest of the house had been. This silence held something, something that had already begun speaking. She looked down at the cassette still inside the machine. May 18th, living room. Her living room, or what used to be. Her chest tightened. Slowly, she pressed play again. The tape clicked. The hum returned. Then, voices. Clearer this time. She didn't step back, didn't brace herself. She just listened. Daniel's voice came first. Younger, easier, the way it used to sound before everything between them had hardened into distance. "You always leave the window open," he said, a hint of laughter beneath the words. And then, hers. "You always close it too fast." The response came without hesitation. Light, familiar. Marlene closed her eyes. She could see it now, not just hear it. The old house, different from this one. Brighter. The kitchen window slightly open, letting in air that smelled like rain. A table between them. Coffee mugs. A conversation that didn't matter and yet did. She opened her eyes again. The room returned. Dim, contained. But the voices continued. Not a full conversation, not complete, just fragments, pieces of moments, a question left hanging, a quiet laugh, a pause that meant something once, even if she couldn't remember exactly what. Marlene let the tape play longer this time. She didn't interrupt it, didn't try to control it. She just stood there, letting it unfold. Coda didn't move. He remained where he lay, his breathing slow and even, as if this space no longer required his attention. The sound filled the room, thin but steady, like something reaching across time. After a while, the tape clicked again. End of reel. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Marlene reached out and pressed stop, though it had already stopped on its own. Her fingers lingered on the recorder. "That was real," she said quietly. Not a question. A confirmation. She stepped back from the table and looked around again, at the tapes, at the notebooks, at the room Daniel had built. He hadn't thrown these moments away. He hadn't buried them. He had kept them, organized them, returned to them. Again and again. Marlene reached for one of the notebooks, not the one she'd opened before. A different one. The pages were filled the same way. Careful handwriting, structured entries, dates marked clearly. But now she read more slowly, more closely. Replayed May 18th. Voice stable. She turned the page. Kitchen recording still clear. Background noise minimal. Another page. Argument. June. Playback difficult. Still trying. Marlene's breath slowed. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper. Argument. She kept reading. Short entries. No emotion written into them. Just facts. Observations. But the absence of emotion said more than if it had been there. Didn't respond. Silence remains. She stopped. The words stayed on the page. Simple, direct, unfinished. Marlene closed the notebook. Carefully. She placed it back exactly where it had been. Her eyes moved again across the tapes, each one labeled, each one containing something. She reached for another. This one didn't have a location written on it, just a name. Marlene. Her hand stilled. For a moment she didn't pick it up. Then she did. Slowly. Her fingers traced to the label, not rushed, not scribbled, written the same way as everything else. Careful, deliberate. She glanced at Coda. He didn't look up, just remained where he was, calm, as if this part no longer required him. Marlene turned back to the recorder. She ejected the first tape, slid it out, set it down, then inserted the second one. Marlene. The name felt different now, not distant, not avoided. Present. She pressed play. The hum returned. Then, nothing. A longer pause this time. Static, faint, and uneven. She waited. Then, Daniel's voice. Older. Not as light as before. Slower. Measured. Marlene, he said. Just her name. Nothing else. The word filled the room. Not loud, but clear. Marlene felt something shift inside her chest. She didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply. She just listened. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this." The words came carefully, as if each one had been chosen before it was spoken. "I didn't think I'd keep these at first." A pause, soft, barely there. "But I couldn't throw them away." Marlene's eyes lowered slightly. Her grip on the edge of the table tightened. The tape continued. "I tried not to play them." Another pause. Longer this time. Didn't work. The room felt smaller, closer. Marlene's throat tightened, but she didn't stop the recording. "I thought if I left it alone long enough," he went on, quieter now, "it would stop mattering." A faint sound followed. Not quite a laugh, not quite a breath. It didn't. Marlene's eyes closed for a second. Just a second. Then opened again. The voice remained, steady, present. "I built this room so I could listen without disturbing anything else." Another pause. Longer. "Or maybe so I wouldn't have to explain it." The tape shifted slightly. A soft mechanical click beneath the words. "I don't know." Silence followed. Not the end. Just a gap. Then, "I should have said something." Marlene inhaled sharply. The sound caught in her chest before it could settle. "I should have called." The words didn't come quickly. They came like something pulled from somewhere deeper. "I didn't." Another pause. Long. Final. "That's on me." The tape clicked. The sound of the reel turning slowed, then stopped. Marlene stood there, still. The room around her didn't move, didn't change. But everything in it felt different now. The tapes, the notebooks, the space itself. This wasn't just a place to store memories. It was a place where he had returned to them, again and again, not fixing anything, not changing the past, just sitting with it, listening. Marlene reached forward and turned the recorder off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, not loud, not overwhelming, just present. She looked down at the tape still inside. Her name, written in his hand, and for the first time since stepping into the house, she understood. This wasn't something he had left behind by accident. It was something he had kept, carefully, deliberately. All this time. Marlene didn't reach for another tape. Not yet. She stood in the center of the room, the weight of what she had just heard settling in slowly. Not all at once, not in a way that overwhelmed her. It came in pieces. The sound of his voice, the pauses between his words, the things he said, and the things he didn't. She moved to the chair and sat down, carefully, as if the room required that kind of respect. Coda lifted his head briefly when she shifted, then lowered it again, resting his chin across his paws. His breathing stayed even, calm, steady. He was no longer watching the walls, no longer listening for anything hidden. He had stopped searching. Marlene looked at him for a moment. "You knew something was here," she said quietly. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. She turned back to the table. The tapes sat where she had left them, the notebooks stacked neatly beside them, the recorder silent now. Everything in place. Nothing disturbed. Except her. She reached for one of the notebooks again. Not the first. Not the one with the general entries. A different one. Thicker. Worn slightly along the edges. She opened it. The handwriting was the same. Careful. Measured. But the content had shifted. Less about weather. Less about repairs. More personal. Still not emotional, but closer. She scanned the page. Tested insulation in corridor. Sound carries less. She frowned slightly. Corridor. She looked up instinctively, as if she could see it from where she sat. The hidden passage. The narrow space that led here. She looked back down. Another entry. Recording clearer when door sealed. Another. Noise outside interferes. Adjusting. Marlene's brow tightened. She turned the page. The notes continued. Small adjustments. Observations. Corrections. Not random. Not accidental. Intentional. This room hadn't been built just to hold things. It had been built for sound. To contain it. To protect it. To keep it from reaching anywhere else. Marlene leaned back slightly in the chair. Her eyes moved slowly across the room again. The walls. The placement of the table. The distance between the surfaces. Even the vent in the corner, the one that made the tapping sound, was positioned carefully. Everything served a purpose. This wasn't storage. This was design. Coda shifted again, turning slightly so he faced her more directly. His eyes met hers for a moment. Soft. Settled. Different from before. "You're not worried anymore," she said. He blinked slowly, then rested his head again. Marlene looked down at the notebook in her hands. "He wasn't hiding," she murmured. The realization came quietly, not as a sudden thought, as something that had been building, now finally settling into place. He was trying to keep it contained. She closed the notebook and set it back down. Her hand lingered on it for a moment. Then she reached for the tape with her name again. She didn't play it this time. She just held it. Turned it slightly in her fingers. The label, the careful lettering. He hadn't written much on it. Just her name. That was enough. Marlene stood, slowly. The room didn't feel as tight now. Still small. Still enclosed. But not oppressive. She walked to the edge of the space near the entrance to the hidden passage and paused. Looked back. At everything he had left behind. At the system he had built. At the time he had spent here. Alone. Working. Listening. Returning. She tried to picture him in this room, sitting where she had just sat, replaying those tapes, hearing the same voices, the same moments, over and over, not changing them, not fixing anything, just staying with them. The thought didn't feel heavy. It felt quiet. Coda stood up and stretched, a slow, easy movement. Then he walked toward her. No hesitation, no urgency, just movement. He passed her and stepped into the narrow passage without stopping. Marlene watched him go, then followed. The transition back into the corridor felt different. The air warmed slightly. The space widened. The light, what little there was, returned. She stepped fully back into the hallway and turned to look at the panel she had opened. It hung slightly ajar, not fully closed, not hidden anymore. She rested her hand on it for a moment, didn't push it shut, didn't leave it open, just touched it. Then let her hand fall. Coda walked a few steps down the hallway and stopped, turned back to look at her. Not waiting, just checking. Marlene stepped forward again. They walked the length of the corridor together. This time, it didn't feel as long. Still unusual. Still not quite aligned with the rest of the house, but no longer confusing. She understood it now. Not the structure, not fully, but the purpose. Back in the main room, the air felt different. Not lighter, just more familiar. The front door was still open, the forest beyond it unchanged. Marlene stepped onto the porch and took a breath. The scent of the trees returned. Earth, wood, distance. She looked out for a moment, then back at the house, at the doorway behind her, at the space that now held more than she had expected. Coda came to stand beside her, quiet, still. She glanced down at him. "You're done," she said. He didn't move, but his posture had changed, relaxed, no longer searching, no longer listening for something out of place. Whatever had drawn him here had settled. Marlene nodded slightly, then looked back at the house, at the life that had unfolded inside it without her, at the time that had passed, at the things that had been kept, not shared, not resolved, just held. She stepped back inside, left the door open. Not for light, not for air, but because closing it didn't feel right. Not yet. Behind her, the hallway remained quiet. The hidden passage still there, the room beyond it unchanged. But something within it had shifted. And this time, it wasn't the house. Marlene stood just inside the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame. The air moved differently now, not warmer, not brighter, just settled. Coda stepped past her and into the living space without hesitation. He circled once near the table, then lay down with a quiet exhale, stretching his legs out in a way he hadn't since they arrived. No tension, no listening, no waiting. Marlene watched him for a moment. Then she stepped fully inside and let the screen door swing gently behind her. It didn't latch. It didn't need to. The house felt open, not in structure, in presence. She moved slowly through the rooms, noticing things she hadn't before. The way the light shifted across the floor in the late afternoon. The faint smell of wood that had warmed slightly since she first arrived. The small imperfections in the walls, places where something had been fixed, adjusted, made to last. Daniel's hands were in all of it. Not just the hidden room, everywhere. She paused at the entrance to the hallway, looked down its length. It didn't feel as long now. Still narrow. Still slightly misaligned with the rest of the house, but no longer confusing. No longer something that needed to be explained. It was simply there. She stepped into it again. Not cautiously, not searching, just walking. Her hand brushed the wall lightly as she passed the place where the panel had been opened. It still sat slightly ajar, just as she had left it. She didn't close it, didn't open it further. She just kept walking. The sound came once more. Tap, soft, faint. She stopped, turned her head slightly, listened. Tap. It was the vent. The same loose piece of metal shifting with the movement of air down through the hidden space. Nothing more. Nothing else. Marlene stood there for a moment. Then she nodded. Not to the sound. To herself. She continued down the hallway, then turned back toward the living room. Coda hadn't moved. His eyes followed her briefly, then closed again. At ease. Marlene walked to the small table near the window and set her bag down. She opened it slowly, reached inside, pulled out a folded piece of paper, blank. She sat. The chair creaked softly beneath her, familiar already. She smoothed the paper flat against the surface and picked up a pen. For a moment, she didn't write. She just sat there, looking at the empty space in front of her. Then, she began. Not quickly, not with urgency. The words came the same way everything else had in this house. Measured, deliberate. She didn't stop to think too far ahead, didn't try to fix anything, didn't try to explain everything. She just wrote. When she finished, she read it once, then folded it carefully. She stood, the paper held lightly in her hand, and walked back toward the hallway. This time she didn't hesitate at the panel. She pushed it open fully, stepped into the narrow passage. The air felt the same, cool, still, unchanged. The hidden room waited at the end, exactly as she had left it. The tapes, the notebooks, the recorder, nothing disturbed, nothing altered. She walked to the table, placed the folded letter beside the stack of notebooks. Not hidden, not tucked away, just placed. She rested her hand on it for a moment, then let it go. Coda remained at the entrance to the passage, watching, but not entering. Not this time. Marlene turned and walked back out. Through the narrow corridor, through the hallway, into the main room. The house felt quieter now, not empty, just complete. She moved to the window and looked out at the forest. The trees stood the same as before. Still, endless, unchanged by anything that had happened inside. The light had shifted again. Lower now, softer. Evening approaching. Behind her, Coda stood and stretched once more, then walked over and settled beside her. Close. Not because he needed to be, because he chose to be. Marlene rested her hand lightly against his back, his breathing steady beneath her palm. She listened. Not to the hallway, not to the hidden room, just to the quiet around her. The house didn't ask for anything, didn't demand anything. It simply existed, holding what it had always held. She stayed there until the light faded, until the edges of the room softened into shadow, until the sounds of the forest shifted into night. And somewhere behind her, the tapping stopped. Not because the vent had been fixed, not because the air had changed, but because it no longer pulled her attention. It no longer interrupted anything. It simply was. And she no longer needed to follow it. Marlene remained by the window, her hand still resting on Coda, her eyes steady. The house was no longer something she had stepped into. It was something she understood. Not completely, not in every detail, but enough. Enough to stay. Enough to not turn away. Enough to let what had been left behind remain, without needing to change it. Some things aren't left behind by accident. They wait. Quietly. Patiently.
She stood there, with her hand resting against the frame of that narrow opening, the hidden room just behind her, quiet again. The top had long since stopped spinning, but his voice hadn't. Not really. It stayed in the air in a way silence never used to. The old woman didn't try to replay it this time. She didn't need to. She finally understood why it was there in the first place. Not to reach her, not even to be answered, just to be kept, because he hadn't known what else to do with it. And all those years, she thought the silence meant he had to let go, but he hadn't. The dog had known something didn't belong, not danger, not nose, just something left unfinished. And instead of turning away, he stayed with it, followed it, stopped exactly where the truth had been hidden behind something ordinary. She would miss it. She almost did. She stepped back into the hallway, slower now, her hand resting the same wall she had once walked past without seeing. It didn't feel tread anymore, just on it. Something don't ask to be fixed, they just wait for someone to stop long enough to finally hear them, the way they were meant to be heard. And as she stood there, she realized it wasn't the house that had changed. It was the part of her that no longer needed to keep that door closed. If something in your life makes a sound you've been ignoring for years, would you follow it the way dog did?